All right. Okay. Just want to check to make sure everybody can hear me. I'm not muted this time. Mic's on, camera's on, ready to go. We have a big show today. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in on a Sunday, which it's a special show. Usually we do Saturdays, but we're also all over across the board. So it's what we do here in Flint, but also for the show in Flint. So I would like to say thank you very much for everybody who is joining us today. We have a lot, so please share. You can jump into the chat. We are on YouTube right now, and as well as Facebook on What Are You Fighting For, as well as my personal page. So yeah, but we're going to get right into it because we have a lot to cover, and this is probably going to be a multi-segmented. It has to be, because there's so much going on in Flint and things happening to Flint that it's a lot of hand. However, I think the powers that be and those that want to be like to control us and keep us scrambling, and they don't expect us to put any kind of expertise or heads together to basically figure out what's going on. So that's what we're doing right now. But yeah, today it is Sunday, February 18th. Oh my God, where's the time gone? And day 3,586. In the ongoing Flint water crisis. Yes, we are creeping up on 10 years because why not? Because of things like you're going to hear today, people getting in the way of getting fixed. Honestly, the fix for the Flint water crisis has become so convoluted and complex because as time goes on, things don't get better. But really, it should have just been switching our water back to a safe water source, the Detroit water source, after they knew almost immediately. There were several people that knew, and this is information that has come out in the criminal cases that are now in the trash, and the civil cases, the class action lawsuits, individual lawsuits against a long list of defendants. And this has been going on for a very long time. The water was switched April 25th, 2014 by the state of Michigan, who was in charge of Flint, who had taken control via former Governor Snyder's emergency manager law, basically to suppress democracy and our voices. So basically our people that we elected in city council didn't have a voice, didn't have power, didn't have a say. The state took control. And not saying that they're completely victims, because right now we have, a mayor in place that is not under state control. However, he's making the choices, his administration's making the choices to allow this to continue on. And the state's sitting back, allowing this to continue on, as well as the EPA. Nobody's forcing anybody to do the right thing, which is just replace the damaged infrastructure, pay for our healthcare, pay for our mental health supports, education supports, the things that you should do. You break it, you fix it, you break it, you buy it, that kind of thing. So, but then also we've got a lot of meddling going on. We've got a lot of, money, because nobody wants to spend money. Because again, I was told years ago by the Speaker of the State House that if they fix Flint, they would have to fix every poison city. Okay, so do that, but also maybe don't poison cities. So that aside, we have a special guest today, and I'm super excited to have her with us. She's a hell of an advocate, and also, an amazing investigative journalist that has not let go of this. And we do have a few allies that have, that believed us when we're saying, hey, this is this giant conspiracy. There's, the government, there's these corporations, there's this money going around, and they're trying to pretend that it's just, people in Flint are dumb, they're scared, they're this or that or whatever. And they continue to try to push this narrative, but they didn't expect us to, one, unite as a city, as residents, and also bring in allies that could actually help, that actually wanted to help and stayed with us all this time, even through the ups and downs and abuses and, threats and just chaos that it is. So that being said, if you watched our show last week, and it's actually in the description of the show, I put a link to our, in the event, to our show last week. We talked about how there was this emergency order by federal Judge Levy, who is overseeing the civil cases, against the state, city, Veolia, an engineering firm, Land, McLaren, let's see. Yeah, so the defendant, so overseeing the civil cases and in federal court. And so we found out that there was an emergency order because one of the companies, Veolia, that is still being sued in court for their role as they were brought in it's disputed, 2015, to help advise the city on what to do. And there was this alleged. Now, I will say this. Let me preface this by saying I've sat in on a lot of hearings, a lot of meetings, read through a lot of documents, and we're going to share, like we always do. We're going to share links. We're going to share PDFs so you can read through it, pause, go back, and read through it because it is a lot. But also, I'm going to say, you know, I'm supported by the Urban News Station, and they give me, they help give me a platform. And I will always, always say, you know, my name is Melissa Mays. I am a Flint resident, mother, activist, social worker in mental health, and I run What Are You Fighting For? I'm also operations manager at Flint Rising. But right now, this show, everything I'm saying, they're my opinions as well as the facts, and I'm sharing them with you. So the views that I express in the show may not, most of the time I do, but may not reflect those of Urban News Station or, you know, Flint Rising or, you know, any other place like that. It's me, you know, what are you fighting for? And that's just, you know, just to cover my bases there. This is going to be my opinion, but I base my opinions on facts. So I will share that with you so you can base your own opinions and make your decisions. So anybody that was with us last week, you know that we had exposed and talked a lot about, you know, all of a sudden there was all of these ads and residents being reached out to by media or people posing as media. There were declarations put forward, basically saying that Veolia was talking about, you know, a quote that one of the attorneys, one of the many attorneys that represent Flint residents, had said in 2018 on a podcast. And there was, you know, in my opinion, media manipulation of residents. People were blindsided on live podcast on Roland Martin's show. They were told, and we showed our email, that they had asked about doing a show about the 10 years coming up and what needs to be done. But then they were blindsided with this thing from this one individual attorney that he had said, you know, which was dumb. And, you know, it can be taken as racist and a lot of things from 2018. So what was happening is all of a sudden the narrative is now about this Veolia's, you know, outrage, the clutching their pearls, saying, oh my God, this attorney said this in 2018. And we just think that's awful. And so they're doing all this. And even in their statement when they settled, because this is coming off the heels of, you know, a $25 million settlement that Veolia settled with some of the, you know, the class and civil cases. But they've turned and made the narrative about this attorney, Corey Stern, who is one of many attorneys, but he's, you know, suing them. And it became just them changing the narrative and then sending out these press releases, reaching out to represented Flint residents, minor Flint residents, and not telling them that's what this is about, but then basically to try to, you know, manufacture outrage. So that way what would show up in the media is that the outrage against this attorney, not outrage against Veolia's inactions in the settlement. So, yeah, that being said, there is a link that's in there, and I'll actually try to share it in the chat as well, but it's in the description so you can check out that show from last week. But right now I'm going to bring in somebody that's an amazing hero to me and so many Flint residents, who has been a part of so many exposés, including Legionnaires and the criminal cases and everything, because, you know, she alerted me to this going on, and I got information from, you know, Arthur Woodson and attorneys and everything. And just so you know, we needed to attend this hearing. So, so she shared with me the filings, and so I'm going to bring her in, and we're going to discuss what we saw at the hearing, and then also dive deeper into this, because I don't think that the media and, you know, has covered this enough. But residents, Flint residents, and other folks who are going through disasters like this need to understand how far that PR firms and large corporations will go to protect their little dollars and their image, and what they're willing to burn down in the process. And again, my opinion, but right now I'd like to bring on an amazing, and I call her investigative journalist extraordinaire, and she's got a huge long resume, done amazing things. But I'm bringing Kayla Ruble on, and so Kayla, welcome.
Hi. Hi, thank you for having me and for such a kind introduction.
No problem. You've done amazing work for us. You stuck with us, you believe us, and you've dug and found so many things. So I just want to start with asking you, why did you think it was important that Flint residents know about the emergency hearing that Judge Levy had brought, and why it was important that we showed up? And I'm going to bring also the flyer that we had done up, but why did you think it was important that we know about it?
Yeah, so I tend to think it's important for you guys to know everything that's going on. And, in my experience, these court cases, whether from the criminal investigation to the civil investigation, they're very complex. And my observation is that the media, hasn't done the best job of conveying the complexities and giving the information. And plus, there's so many to keep track of. It's 10 years later that really there's very few reporters that are kind of reporting regularly, at least, on the developments of the trial. So I know it's hard for a lot of residents to keep track of even like what lawsuits are still out there, what is happening with the lawsuits, who says what in each lawsuit, and they're very complicated. So for me, I just feel like it's, as journalists, I think it's our obligation to make sure that you guys know what's going on, the day to day, and the local outlets in Flint do, I think, try to keep you guys as up to date as possible. But there's a lot. I mean, again, these are pretty sprawling cases. And so last week, as this was unfolding, or over the last week, I would get typically when things start happening where residents get confused, I tend to be one of the first people they start calling. So I, just like, what, did you know anything about this? Or even if it's just like when there's a settlement, like, hey, have you heard about this? And so I try, because I recognize that it's not always going to get the coverage that it deserves. Like, I try to make sure that I can at least inform you guys as much as possible. From all sides. I think it's like a disservice to both, defendants and plaintiffs that there maybe isn't as much information out there as there should be. And so when I saw that there was going to be an emergency hearing on Friday, I did, send it to you guys. I want to make sure you knew. Just because I tend to think, Judge Levy, in my opinion, has done like a really good job of trying to make her court quite open in terms of up until recently, everything was over Zoom, over video. So you could always watch the status conference. Everything is like really out there, which I think is important because this is a public case. This is about a community. And even though it's not city council, so they're not required to necessarily have open meetings and put everything out there, I think she's tried to make things open. And I think it's important that if it's maybe not going to get covered in media, that people are paying attention. And that was obviously validated because, you guys had a huge interest in trying to understand what's going on and what was going to happen at this hearing. And really, this hearing was about you guys. I mean, it is about it's stemming from this potential campaign against this attorney, but it is what happened over the last week from what I was, hearing from you guys and seeing, on Monday, Judge Levy filed a bunch of declarations on the court docket that came from residents and from the attorneys that sort of showed how this had unfolded, and really that residents and activists, primarily activists, were getting contacted, for these media stories. So I think it really does involve you guys as much as this whole case does. This whole case involves your community. And I think it's just important.
So, and that to me, so that means a lot. And so when we talked about the hearing, it was basically Judge Levy pulling forward the Veolia and Actum, which was Veolia's PR firm, to discuss what's going on. And unfortunately, this has been an ongoing issue, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about with the media campaign. And to basically, there's a bit of history. Was it 2 years ago now? I had gone to Ann Arbor to go to U of M hospital and spend some time for neuro testing and everything. And during this time, it was jury selection, I believe, for this case against Veolia, for the civil case, the trial. And as I, and we had already seen, and it was annoying. We'd roll our eyes, like when I would go online to look up anything Flint, you would see these ads, and it was Veolia tried to help Flint. Veolia gave Flint advice. Veolia didn't do anything wrong. And, and it would pop up in my feed on my Google search. And I'm like, oh, this is annoying, and no, it's not. And it was like what the activists, are saying is wrong. And I'm like, well, I think that's a dig at me, but that kind of stuff. But then when I was in Ann Arbor at this time, it was so many. I can't remember, like I sent you the screenshot. It was ridiculous. And it was like every other entry, and some were back to back, was this for this website for Veolia Effects and all this stuff. And also during this time, like, we're seeing all of these ads, and I'm like, what is this? So I sent you screenshots. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And, you know, we checked, and we put our heads together and checked, and we had, like, my husband, who was still in Flint while I was in the hospital, was like, yeah, I only still see the normal, like, 3 or 4 on here. And I'm just seeing so much. And it happened to you too, right?
Yeah, that's sort of, so, you know, I'm someone, I Google the Flint water crisis like a couple times a week, because I'm either like, I want to see what the new news articles are, or I want to see, sometimes, honestly, this is kind of embarrassing, but like, I always get, it's like April 25th to me is like a date where I'm like always like, wait, what? Because there's so much that happens in the lead up to the switch to the river that I feel like I'm always having to like double check, like, what date did something happen? So, you know, you go to the Wikipedia page or whatever. So I'm always Googling it. And it felt like all of a sudden, you know, in the spring of 2022, when the first bellwether trial was going on. So this is the first Flint water crisis trial to go in front of a jury, which is a big deal. And all of a sudden, like, it just felt like I was just seeing, I mean, it was like these ads, they were everywhere on anytime I searched it, to the point, like, I was just getting annoyed because I kept clicking on I would like click on it instead of clicking on what I was trying to get to, because it was just everywhere. There was also a Twitter account launched around that time, where I was just seeing the tweets all the time, to the point I had to like mute it. I mute a lot of things on Twitter because I don't like seeing the same thing over and over again. Like, there's kind of a problem with that. But so yeah, so I was kind of like, this, these ads are a lot. And then it sort of occurred to me in the last week of trial, as I was covering the trial, I realized, like, if I could see the ads, then someone sitting on the jury pool could see the ads, and this trial had been so long. So I really just went into this with this question of, like, I mean, to me, that's a really interesting question, is like, what is, where are the lines in 2024 to what 2022 at that time, in like this digital era? Like, what are the lines for, advertising and promotion by companies during a trial? Very few cases actually make it to trial at this point. That's, most litigation reaches a settlement before trial. So this issue doesn't always necessarily come up. And so that was sort of a question I started with, was like, okay, is this a problem? And, the more I talked to experts, they found this like really, really interesting. Like, what was happening here, especially when you have the situation with bellwether trials, which means there will basically be trials going on for years unless there's some sort of settlement. So the question was like, how could this impact like the general public opinion? Or like, because especially if you're talking, the court in Ann Arbor, the jury pool, the jury veneer is like, it's at least 5 counties: Wayne County, Monroe, Jackson. So a lot of counties. So there's a lot, so you're wondering like, okay, if people are being exposed to this more or less, or, what have you. So I thought that was like an important and interesting question. And I started to notice that, I started doing research, and lots of companies build these websites. It's not just Veolia. Johnson & Johnson has one for the talc cases. I believe there's one for the Roundup cases. Everyone has one. So what I also had noticed too was that the website Veolia had created, which was created back in 2016, so years before trial, right when the lawsuits were filed. I noticed that during the trial, they were regularly updating that website with sort of articles about what was happening that day in trial, and like quite, sort of focused on certain witnesses and whatever. So it just seemed like there was this, there was definitely an effort by this company to make sure that their opinions and their arguments in the case were out into the public in a way that I just had not experienced before with the case. I've covered a lot of trials, more criminal trials and civil trials, at least in terms of the actual trial happening. But I've covered a lot of stuff. I just never really encountered something quite like that. So I, did this story, and when I, looked at the advertising data, it showed that, the ad impression, that the ad presence on Google for sure had increased over a period of, the 2 years leading up to trial, compared to prior to that. And so that was the question, was, okay, it looks like, this increase started in the lead up to trial. Was that intentional? Was it not intentional? And if it was intentional, what was the purpose? And let's go from there. And then there were some questions about, was this done with the intent of influencing the jury? Was it just to get the message out there? And then like, what does that, either way, what does that mean? And of course, Veolia has said they did not do this to influence the jury pool. and that they, they have, but as soon as it came, this article came out, the judge expressed like definite concern, that she wanted to understand what happened and why this was done, because it didn't exactly make sense, to her, it seemed like there was enough concern that there could be an issue. And so that started basically 2 years of discovery into the public relations campaign. So since the conclusion of the first bellwether trial in August of 2022, the plaintiffs in the case, which are essentially at this stage lawyers representing, thousands of children in different age groups, and there are other individual cases that still are, exist against Veolia, but in this case it was the children. And so they started looking into, what happened? Like, was this an, direct intent at influencing the jury pool? Was there, geographical targeting? What was going on? And so through that process, really, it also revealed, as Veolia began providing more data about their advertising, also provided more insight into this public relations apparatus, which has been sort of established since 2016. But as many people will remember, a big portion of their contract with Flint had to do with communications. And we know that they worked with a local public relations firm. And so I think, it became, I think, of interest to the plaintiffs in general, at least from what I observed in the status conferences and reading the filings, was like it seemed to be that suddenly there were these questions about these public relations efforts, and that maybe they sort of offered some insight into the original public relations aspects. And so basically we spent the last 2 years kind of learning about this company's public relations efforts. And, they provided data according to the Veolia North America Google AdWords campaign account. They did not choose to do zip code targeting. It was just, they put these ads on the United States and Canada, although the plaintiff's expert who has analyzed the data was able to compare different campaigns. So you have different ad campaigns you can have that have different features on them. And for whatever reason, one of their campaigns appears to have performed much better outside of Michigan, outside of the jury pool, the veneer, while the other one performed much better inside the jury veneer. And both the jury veneer for the federal cases and the state cases in Genesee County. And from his analysis, it appeared as though Veolia did choose to continue using the campaign that performed best locally. So he found that there was evidence, he felt that there was evidence based on his analysis of sort of weighting towards, sort of a geographical preference. But Veolia's expert has said, yes, but they didn't do zip code targeting, whatever. So that's sort of where that lies. And they did not use zip code targeting on their Google AdWords campaign. But as we learned about the public relations effort, and as this discovery came out, there were more over the course of several months, it became, I guess, apparent, based on some of the efforts for depositions that we saw kind of play out in a lot of these hearings. Certain firms were identified, public relations firms that had helped Veolia with this campaign, including some firms that maybe hadn't been known previously. As journalists, we get contacted typically by firms, but sometimes, with a lot of companies, they have an internal spokesperson, an external spokesperson. They might have a marketing company that helps them. They might have just a specific crisis management or public relations campaign. Maybe there's a company that helps them with the litigation. Maybe there's a company that helps them with their day-to-day business. So as journalists, we do see a lot of that, but we don't always know everyone that is involved. I think from the lawyer's perspective, I don't know, I guess, what lawyers are told about who is working on what side of a PR campaign. So I'm not sure what they knew going into the discovery, but definitely, as it progressed, they were finding more and more, and then sort of issuing new subpoenas for deposition as this went on. And then through that, they started looking back at some of the original discovery in the case and seeing that, looking at the privilege log where documents are withheld for attorney-client privilege, that some of those documents had some of the public relations firms copied onto them. And that now, knowing what they knew about the public relations effort, that probably, you know, they sort of filed some disputes over this discovery saying, you know, we don't believe this is privilege, and kind of took that to the judge last summer, in which she ruled that many of those conversations were not privileged. So it's basically created this whole, you know, other scenario, and other look into the PR issues, which are still sort of the plaintiffs are still kind of going back and forth with Veolia over some of the privilege documents and over some confidentiality issues. So that's sort of the backdrop of everything that happened in the last week. And I don't know if that was a good enough summary. It's probably too much.
No, that's great, because it becomes like the trial ended up becoming not who did what, who knew what, who did what. Now it's morphed into this big PR monster. But then also, like you had said, what's the line? What's the line with a whole bunch of ads that happen to pop up around certain times? You know, what is a crime? What is not a crime? What's interference with jury selection or the process of justice as a whole? What is, you know, where what is going on here? So then, you know, so this, and then some of the attorneys started to dig into it quite a bit, right? And wouldn't let go of it. And you had spoken about the privilege, the documents. So during this time, discovery was happening, and the set of attorneys were digging in hard to try to get, you know, all of the documents, because at the end of the day, we're trying to find out who Veolia talked to. Did they talk to the state of Michigan? Did they talk to the city of Flint? What did they say? You know, because, you know, you hear all this, like, you know, I don't recall in these depositions. And then you hear, you know, their testimony is like, I don't remember. I don't think so. I don't this and this. But in today's world of, you know, of digital everything, digital communications, you know, all this stuff, you know, you can track it. And that's what, and if anybody's hearing my music, it's my clock in the background. It's quite lovely. So you're hearing all this, and we have the ways to track this down. So trying to get the documentation so we can get a clearer picture of who did what, it has been difficult, and it has been a fight. It has been a monstrous fight to get this. And so Corey Stern, which you'll hear us talk a few times, who doesn't represent me. So, and again, I'm not here to defend a person. I'm here to show how Veolia basically attacking and singling out an attorney is impacting the residents and completely like distorting the narrative. And they're making it all about this one person, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation focusing on an individual is weird, let alone it's an individual suing you. Also, where's the law? Where's the line? Like, how is that okay? Like, you know, during all of this legal stuff going on. And so then you drag Flint residents into it, and, you know, and then Veolia is not sitting here saying, hey, we're sorry for what we did and didn't do, because again, we saw Veolia in their statement not even take responsibility. They're still saying, even with the $25 million settlement they've agreed to, they're still saying they didn't do anything wrong. And even in their statement, they go to attack this Corey Stern, who then, you know, who has been fighting about all of the ads, the targeted ads or non-targeted ads or however, and then fighting to get discovery. So then basically, it is like this person, this lawyer, and again, he's not on his own. He has a firm and partners and stuff, but this person has then made this gigantic organization, this giant company, like so upset, and has just made them so upset because he won't back off, that now they're, you know, but then again, he's helping to expose to the judge and to public, like, okay, they're saying all these documents are privileged, but are they? And of course, we know, you know, attorney-client privilege means you can't put it out publicly. This is also one of the things that helped, you know, I mean, everybody should know this. Most people who know this, who've been involved in any kind of like litigation, any kind of court stuff, even people who watch, you know, Law and Order stuff. I just want to throw a jab into here, because obviously our attorney general and her appointed solicitor general didn't seem to know that and decided to drag in privileged documents and use them in their case, which then got it. One of the many, many reasons it got tossed in the trash. That's just me on a personal level throwing another jab, because, you know, it would be super helpful if we had criminal cases ongoing so this stuff could be exposed on multiple, you know, and it wouldn't be just this civil case with this one attorney being targeted and the entire narrative and the entire truth being completely just Veolia's apparently personal problems with this one attorney. So, so I like to just throw them jabs in there because it's like, okay, so, you know, we're not getting justice financially and nobody's taking responsibility. But then we have this giant organization. And I talked with, you know, the director of Flint Rising last night, and Naira Sharif has completely, you know, has repeatedly said these giant corporations, this is what they do to stop movements. This is what they do to stop justice from happening, because they have, you know, more money than, you know, God, and they have all these attorneys and PR firms that continue to change. And so they don't get held in this country. They don't get held responsible nearly enough. Well, usually at all. And they get away with all of these things, and they get away with not taking responsibility. And they have insurance policies that pay, you know, just like Norfolk Southern and East Palestine, they have these billion-dollar insurance policies. So it's not like they're paying money to clean up what they did, you know, out of their pockets. And so but they defend it like it is their money, like it is coming out of their personal, you know, which I'm sure, you know, shareholders, whatever inspires giant multi-billion-dollar corporations to want to attack not just, you know, Flint residents, but and the facts, but also an attorney. So it began to get into a fight, and you covered this about these privileged documents. Were all of these documents that Veolia was claiming was protected by attorney-client privilege, were they actually, you know, protected?
Right.
Because now they're talking about, oh, well, it's privileged communications with the PR firms, because then it's digging into who knew what, who did what was the instructions and everything like that. So, so this is something that that I believe, is this in the Mercury, the Veolia files that you have for the, well, I mean, so there's a lot of documents here. So I'm going to pop off and let you, explain this here, which is the supposed communications, and I'll let you explain it.
Well, no, so these are actually not privileged. These were documents that were filed, you know, in the original, you know, sort of early in the fall of 2022, as this sort of initial advertising discovery got underway. These were sort of filed in an early aspect of that sort of inquiry. And they just show, I think, the conversations between the PR people and Veolia, and showing that they're with outside PR firms. These were not, these were not designated as privileged. We actually haven't seen the privileged documents. So, and there's a debate, you know, there are scenarios in which an outside PR firm can be considered privileged, and depending on what the communications are about, if the public relations firm works for the lawyers, because there's different kinds of litigation PR. Are you advising the company on how to help improve their reputation to the public, or are you advising the lawyers in the case on, you know, how to talk to like helping them talk to journalists? And so that, you know, there's sort of these nuances to what is your relationship to the case. And Judge Levy, you consider that. She's looked at all of their contracts up until 2019. Prior to this week, she had looked at all the contracts up until 2019, and there were different versions. There were versions, and this was one in 2019, which she determined. So earlier contracts, which are not here because some of them were just verbal contracts, they weren't signed. And in those, she determined, okay, the contracts from 2016 with Mercury Public Affairs and with Rafsky, this other PR firm, you know, they're about Veolia's media campaign to the public, Veolia's effort, like many companies do, to improve their reputation. And they're very, you know, there's protections for free speech, and they are parties to a case just like you guys are. So you both enjoy like certain, you know, freedoms of speech to be able to advocate for you or your brand. And so she determined that a lot of that communication based on the contract was very much just about the sort of public perception issue. And so therefore that wouldn't be privileged because it's not related to the case. It's allowed, but it's, you know, it's not related to the case. Then, you know, she determined by looking at this one that certain conversations after 2019 would have different claims to privilege, because based on this, what this contract is saying is this is an agreement between Mercury Public Affairs and Campbell Conroy, which is one of the defense firms, that Mercury Public Affairs is going to advise Campbell Conroy on the trial proceedings, on the aspects of the litigation. Now, it was in response to apparently the Guardian newspaper and also the Flint Journal, who did an article in late 2019 based on discovery in the case that they had FOIA'd, that showed some internal communications from Veolia talking about lead concerns and potential, you know, maybe that one of the solutions was to go back to DWC in very early 2015. Veolia disputes that that's relevant for the case, but it was, the Guardian reported on it. So that's when you have this contract coming in. And so Judge Levy said, okay, I see this contract. It's with you and the law firm. So certain conversations after 2019 that happened between Veolia and the law firm, depending on what they are, would be held to sort of a different standard of privilege. So she's had to make rulings along the way based on these like layers and layers of contracts and how they change over the course of the litigation. Because, at the end of December 2019 as well, at the time, before the pandemic, the trial was scheduled to actually start in 2020. So you can see, she said in her ruling, clearly based on these contracts, it would have been in the lead up to litigation. That all, makes sense. It's with the lawyers. And yeah, so then that's sort of where the challenge happened. And what she ended up ruling in the summer of 2023, so last summer, was based on these contracts, and that most of the media campaign documents in from the initial discovery, so it really spans through 2017, that a large majority of those, if they involved the media campaign, were not privileged. And now what's happening is and she said, she ordered those documents to be released. The defense attorneys did release some of those documents. But according to the plaintiffs, they haven't released all of them, or they've released some of them being redacted. So the plaintiffs have now filed motions to compel, which will be heard by a judge, I believe, on February 29th, to determine whether they are actually privileged. The plaintiffs say that clearly, based on the judge's ruling, they aren't privileged. The defendants, VNA, says that the plaintiffs are misinterpreting the judge's ruling, and that her ruling was actually more narrow, and that so there's a back and forth, and it's an interesting argument, as it always is in these cases. And so I think it'll be up to this magistrate judge to decide whether they are privileged or not, but they revolve around kind of the initial media campaigns, both, in the lead up to the lawsuits, and then once the lawsuit started. And, and the relevance to that is that, the media campaign after the lawsuit started, how were they, what narratives were they choosing? Every side is going to have a narrative in a case, and this one like no other. And so that kind of, I think, is what the plaintiffs are interested in. It also appears as though there's some communications about lobbying that maybe we didn't know about before. And so that's where we're at with those. And, that motion was filed. It became apparent that motion was going to get filed late last year, and it was filed at the very beginning of this year, and the hearings were ordered for February. And that was sort of happening at the same time as the class action lawsuit was preparing for trial, which the class action lawsuit involves largely property damages for unrepresented individuals or members who are already people who are represented by the class attorneys, which, upwards of as many as like 50,000 people are represented by non-class attorneys. So there's kind of like both groups are quite large, but like the class action is sort of one side and the individual cases are sort of another. And so that was happening in the lead up to the trial. And then of course we know that 2 weeks ago, the trial was supposed to start last week, but 2 weeks ago they reached a settlement. So that class action trial has, been put on hold and will likely will no longer happen. Veolia and the class action lawyers are still working on the deals of the settlement, so it hasn't been released yet. But so that's kind of where we are as it comes to this, and when this campaign or when this effort to contact Flint residents and to get you guys to start speaking out about Attorney Corey Stern to talk about, to try to, sort of that effort as it started. And that's something I noticed, just covering this case, is that there were other groups besides Veolia too that have had issues with the attorney fees and sort of challenging those attorney fees. And you see that in cases. There's a whole industry out there that, won't really agree with plaintiffs' attorneys. And that's their ideological choice, I guess. And they had issues, and they had advertisements and talked about attorneys, saying the trial attorneys are greedy, whatever. So it was very much like attorneys as a whole. So it was not differentiating between Corey Stern, Michael Pitts, Ted Leopold, not a differentiation. I am not totally sure when the, specificity against Stern really started, but I started noticing, just even with my advertising story, that even though I had found all of that on my own, there was this sense, I think, from Veolia that, you know, the story had come from Corey, or that he was somehow benefiting from that story. And so, you know, their response to me was directly, you know, it named him by name in a way that I hadn't seen before. So I think he said in a court filing last week, in a letter to the judge, it said something, you know, that he feels like the sort of acrimony against him has really like heightened since the Bellwether one trial. And I think you can sort of see that in the statements, that there's sort of that specificity towards him, even though it's important to note that there's like many attorneys representing individual clients. He is the co-lead class counsel, but there's multiple.
So this is where it comes in to where it started to snowball, because then Flint residents were reached out to. They were blindsided on live on a podcast with Roland Martin. They were then asked by this PR firm. So basically, this is where it starts to become like even more trouble. So one side cannot reach out to a represented individual or a minor to, you know, that's just in general. So you can't do that without going through their attorney. So if somebody, you know, from the other side wants to get a hold of me, they have to go have their attorneys go through my attorneys to get to talk to me. And that's the right thing to do. That's what you do. And that's why a lot of folks will go, if they want to interview with me, they go through my attorneys first. That's just the rule. That's one of the rules. And, but then this wasn't happening. So then you have, the confusion is so then Actum. So why this emergency hearing got called, which is what's on the screen right now, was Judge Levy's order for this emergency hearing to be like, okay, come in front of me and explain what happened. And she needs to know, was Actum, which is a PR firm working with Veolia, were they operating on behalf of the attorneys, through the attorneys? Was it the attorneys doing part of this, reaching out to these protected, represented minor individuals? What is their relationship? What is Actum's relationship with Veolia, and what was the contract to say they could, you know, act on behalf of this? And so then also, why is this happening? And then also exposing that this has gone on, and Flint residents were now, you know, extremely frustrated. They don't want to talk to the media. And again, I've said it time and time again that I felt like, you know, this happening and Flint residents feeling bad about speaking out or getting blindsided, making it uncomfortable, trying to start some kind of, you know, racial outrage, and under the guise of, hey, we just want to have this gentle conversation. And then who's putting this forward? Because then Actum was reaching out to folks like Arthur Woodson, who then contacted, you know, you and the court saying, this is wrong. Why are they asking these questions? Why is this happening? Especially on, you know, right before all of these other trials and hearings and everything were set to happen, but also on the heels of the settlement. And then we go back and look at our emails that we received from like the Roland Martin show, and it was on the 29th of January. It's like, what's going on? And, you know, all this stuff. So then all this is, okay, so who is doing what and why as for this like media blitz, and you know, who's under whose orders, and are there rules being broken that, you know, these attorneys are being a part of this, right? That are a part of this, you know, media blitz and reaching out to represent. You cannot do that. And so then the judge is like, all right. So there was an emergency hearing called for this past Tuesday, and she ordered that the defendants like show up, not virtual. So basically it was Judge Levy saying, I've had enough. And there are, you know, and she talked about this during the hearing, is the Eastern District of Michigan civility principles and enforce the local rules. So there are rules that attorneys must follow. But also, if Actum, the PR firm, was hired by the attorneys, they're acting as an arm of the attorney, or are they not? And so she wanted to hear what was going on. So then there was a hearing set for February 13th at 2 p.m. Now, several Flint residents had discussed this, and we had talked about, like, we needed to show up for this because this is causing harm to us, to the residents. And also we need residents to know that, hey, it is okay to talk to media, but you got to follow these steps. But also we need to hear what's going on. Because then they're saying, well, no, residents are appalled. Residents are the ones that were talking about this 2018 podcast clip. No, it's the residents. And it's like, then it was like, no, it's Actum. No, it's Veolia. No, it's this. And that was enough. It was enough. And so basically, you know, with this hearing, we decided it was important that residents show up and, you know, sit in. And so we made an event, we made a flyer, and I keep putting this up here because I just want people to notice like the theme. We wanted it to be very simple, very simplistic. And so, you know, Artistic Mess made us this flyer, you know, bright red. It just wanted to be attention getting. And it says, notice Flint residents and water warriors unite, demand Veolia and Actum, which is Veolia's PR firm, stop manipulating Flint residents' pain for their own gain, join us. And then we have the information here about the hearing. So Tuesday, February 13th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern time, because that was the time that was scheduled for the hearing. And then we had put parking information. And then my husband came up with RAP, which is Residents Against Propaganda, stand together to demand Veolia, Actum, and all involved to stop using Flint faces and voices to twist the narrative to escape responsibility and justice in the ongoing Flint water crisis. So that's basically it. So then fast forward all this stuff, and it all kind of happened super fast. So we put it up, and we weren't sure how many people were able to make it and who could take, like me, I had to take a long lunch and breaks and had to work late. You know, we had to like, okay, how are we going to do this to get down there? Didn't know what was going to happen. Wasn't sure. And you have to, you know, obviously leave your phones in the car. So most of us were walking into the courtroom, and some of us were late. Talking, it's, you know, like it's me, always me. But we're late. But then I was on the phone with the client. Long story short, Flint residents saw something driving around the and I want to point this out because to me it is again, my background is in PR and marketing. That's actually, you know, what I was doing. I was doing PR for bands, radio stations, different stuff like that, clients, all this stuff. And so we'd used experimental marketing in trucks. Like we'd used, you know, box trucks for different things, like playing video games for Madden and you know, doing stuff for Sears and for all this other stuff. And this spray painted truck rolled by with the electronic screens rolling a message, basically. But also there was audio being put out. And it was Corey Stern's audio, or was supposed audio from this 2018 podcast. And it looked like this. And this was circling the courthouse at the same time the hearing was going on. And interestingly enough, the red, white, and black, thought that was interesting. And it says, listen to Corey Stern in his own words, describe the people in the city of Flint, August 2nd, 2018. And then there was a website listed. And we're, you know, so I don't have my phone on me. You know, we don't have our phones because we had to leave them in our cars for security. And we're like, oh my God, what is this? And why is this circling the courthouse? And, you know, so people were just like in shock and appalled. And a lot of people, like including the attorneys, didn't even know until we were in the hearing that this was even going on outside as we were all inside. So in my personal opinion, you know, you look at our flyer and then you look at this truck. And I think that, you know, it was them trying to make it look like we were protesting or we were going to be speaking out about Corey Stern. And here's the thing. Corey Stern is a human. He's one of our many, many attorneys that are working for Flint, especially kids and all this stuff. I couldn't care less what he said in 2018. There is, you know, it's offensive. He did apologize for whatever this comedy, you know, obviously he needs, you know, some PR people to be like, hey, don't do these things. But it's a person. Now, at the end of the day, I don't care what Corey Stern said in 2018. I care about what's happening right now and what this person says in court to help get justice for Flint folks, right? And why is Veolia, this multi-bazillion dollar company, like, I mean, because there was no question, Veolia, you know, Actum, whatever, you know, was behind this.
They registered to Actum, so.
Right. So, and it was, yeah. So, and we'll,
confirmed.
Right. And it's just like, are you serious? So then, but then on that website it said things like, where's the money? Why has nobody received money? Well, we all know, and Judge Levy covered it in the hearing, that it's still in process because Archer and the claims processor, it's a very lengthy process. Well, the attorneys got all the money and this, and they, you know, but then targeting this one person. And I'm like, the whole thing about the Flint water crisis is no one person got it worse than the other, but why is there one attorney getting worse than another? An attorney doesn't live here. It should not be about the attorney. Why is Veolia focused on the attorneys? Why don't you focus on what you did or did not do and what your folks are representing? How are you not controlling your PR firm? But also, this is about us, the residents. So we get really frustrated when people use the Flint water crisis for their own gain. Hence going back to that flyer that we made, because Veolia, hello, Actum, whoever you're hiring, whatever, the Flint water crisis is not about Corey Stern at all. It's about us and our suffering and what we've gone through. And you should be owning up to your responsibility and your, actions and everything in this process. Because I was there the beginning of 2015, sitting in on the meeting, listening to your people talk about, let's put the water bills in an envelope so they don't see the amount right away, so they won't be so angry. Maybe don't put them on the cars. Maybe put on different layers. Not talking about any of the proper things like corrosion control. They actually wanted to decrease the ozone generation, which helps kill bacteria without side effects, and increase the ferric chloride, which would have made our water far more caustic. And they say in their filings and on their website that Flint didn't follow their corrosion control suggestions. Well, good. That's good, because it would have made our water more corrosive and caused more damage. Anyhow, that being said, when the judge found out, judge wasn't happy. So we sit through the hearing and Kayla was there. The judge basically said that at the beginning, I don't want to be here. This is not justice. This is getting in the way. And so we're sitting there, and yes, it is a bunch of Flint residents. A lot of us had not been in the same room since 2016 because divisions, life, what we're focused on and all that stuff. But we got to listen to Veolia basically say we knew nothing, we didn't do anything, it's not our fault, and we did nothing wrong. But then also the one attorney Olson raised his voice and was like screaming at the judge, saying that she was suppressing freedom of speech. It's like, hello, there are rules. So going through all this, and I'm putting up, this was the order following the hearing, because what had come out of it was basically a mess. We're sitting there, residents are sitting there listening to Veolia say, it's not our fault, we didn't do this, we didn't know anything, because most responsible corporations who hire PR firms have a handle on everything. When I worked in PR and marketing, everything that we did out in the field, or that we published, or we put on the radio, or we put on TV, or we put on the website, had to go through their legal team. Had to protect them. So that way we're not putting stuff out there, because we were an arm of the company. So what I heard was Veolia, a multi-billion-dollar international company, said we had no idea. They didn't know what Actum was doing. And so the judge started asking questions and got frustrated. Basically, at one point she said, I'm going to go ahead and just end this hearing now since you're not listening. And I'm like, and as a mother, I'm like,
it was a very, I'm going to turn this car around moment.
It was. And so I'm over there, and a lot of it was like my ears ringing because I was so angry about some of this stuff, and watching them sit there and go after this attorney that is like, it's obvious you got personal problems because this attorney is, fighting you and going against you. But the fact that you're trying to manipulate Flint residents' feelings and create this moral outrage and create this, emotional trauma on top of what's already been done to Flint residents, but focus it on a single attorney as opposed to the company, and to misdirect all of it, to even use their statement of, we settled for $25 million. We didn't do anything wrong, but we're cutting this $25 million check by choice. But also Corey Stern is the devil, who wasn't even involved in that part of the settlement. It's right. Gross.
And whose claims are very different. It's property damages for unrepresented individuals versus children who are lead poisoned, adults who are lead poisoned, adults with Legionnaires, and adults with, also could have property damage or economic damage. But, the class was a very unphysical impact, like very much not the physical impacts of the lead poisoning in the lead contamination. So it's when you're talking about like an attorney sort of being greedy and wanting to get as much money as he can, it's like, well, you do have to understand the clients are facing a different set of harms than what are being alleged against the property damages case in the larger class issue. Yeah.
And so it's sitting there not making sense. And I'm writing down all these notes like furiously. And then I just keep saying, I keep writing the same 3 letters, WT, and I guess the last one, because hearing their excuses, but it's always we don't know. And I don't know if anybody else has gotten tired of this, but hearing the most powerful companies and politicians and individuals say, I don't know, I don't recall, has gotten really old. Because if your memory is this bad, you shouldn't be in charge of anything. And if you're going to be so irresponsible to where you're not going to have any contact with your PR firm. And that was what it was. It was Veolia trying to say, not responsible. We had nothing to do with this. But documentation kind of shows otherwise. And so, and I'm gonna let you describe this because then I just keep getting angry. But then Judge Levy gave a to-do list. She said by this past Friday, these things had to be turned in. So I have this up here and I'm gonna let you read through it and explain what was Judge Levy looking for?
Right. So what she said on Tuesday, she said very clearly, this is phase one. We're going to talk today about the rules that I think were implicated, what I understand happened, what we know happened so far based on, declarations filed in court. And I'm going to give you a list of documents basically a list of things that I need to figure out what's next and what happens in phase two so that she can figure out how to, as she said, sort of get this thing back on track. Like in the last 2 weeks, this court case went basically off the rails and we're going to get back going. She's very much, Judge Levy is, I think she's an, she feel like she's a very mild-mannered judge. She sort of makes these very thoughtful decisions. She doesn't get very frustrated. And, a lot of this case has played out in the public in the media and public realm in a way that has never really fazed her before. And I think really, especially, it's not that it's the attack on the attorney, which is, can be problematic with the civil rules. And then it's the contact with the residents. And I think that to her, she has decided that she needs to figure out how she's going to, that this needs to get kind of reined back in, and figure out how to do that. She has not asked anyone to stop speaking. She hasn't issued any orders saying they can't advertise, they can't do that. She's not done that. But right now she wants the information. She wanted information from the attorneys of sort of, like you said, it was a to-do list. She wanted every, every attorney who had communicated with the PR company, and whether that was attorneys for the two private law firms or Veolia North America or Veolia in France. She wanted all of that. She wanted all of their communication, anyone at the PR firm that had worked on this effort to contact residents, and she wanted a list of contracts between all of the parties. Because over this PR dispute, what we learned, early on in the advertising inquiry that came out in a status conference was that the French office actually had been some of their employees had taken the lead on the Flint litigation campaign, at least during the trial. And so there's always been that kind of balance of Veolia North America did this or didn't do this, but Veolia France did or did not do this. So she sort of made it very clear she wanted all of that. And then she also wanted the communications with media and, Actum's communications. And so that's what she asked for. And then, of course, because the attorneys sort of informed her in the middle of this hearing that this truck was circling around right after the defense attorney had, raised some concern about freedom of speech being chilled, that actually this was going on right there. And she definitely, that really, I think to her, I look at it always I try to look at it from your guys' perspective, because it's okay, is this to me, it's always directed at you guys are the plaintiffs in this case. They are Flint residents. So anytime there's an attack on a plaintiff, it's an attack on Flint residents. So that's the perspective I'm looking at it. But I think she's also looking at it from you have to keep order in the court. It's order in the court, right? And this is outside the courthouse. So I think she definitely had a strong reaction to that, as you can see in this order. So she says, do you want to read it?
It says, additionally, the court was informed that during the hearing, a truck was circling Ann Arbor Federal Building, broadcasting attacks against the same plaintiff's counsel. The court orders VNA's counsel to inform the court of the names of any VNA lawyers, in-house or otherwise, who had knowledge or engaged in any communication regarding this disturbing development. VNA is further ordered to provide the names of any individuals at VNA, Veolia, or Actum LLC who had any knowledge of this incident and what their involvement entails. And so, that was something.
And I have to say, I can't believe I'm seeing this. There is a lot of what's happened always I would say anytime with the Flint water crisis, I'm sort of it's something I've never seen before. That just from any side, whether it's how much you guys speak out and advocate for yourself, or whether it's some of the things that the various defendants do. Let's not forget there are plenty of other defendants besides Veolia. And so it's always, everything that happens, it always feels like it's just on another planet compared to anything else I've ever covered in my life. This is something I can't believe I'm reading in a court filing, I will say. It is definitely, I don't think she ever expected to have to write it. And yeah, and she's making it clear, and she's distinguishing in here because there are different rules for lawyers than there are for their clients. Again, like we talked about, I think at this point, though, what she's sort of, the attorneys at various points over the last 2 weeks had moments at which they could have, at a certain point, I think the question right now is, what is the responsibility of an attorney? And what is an attorney's responsibility to, ensure that their clients aren't doing something that's disrupting the trial? And I think that's going to be like her big decision. So yes, now we get to the filing from, I have to plug in my computer really quick.
So she
from
had
Friday night.
So Judge Levy had demanded a list basically who knew what, when did you work. She wanted a list of all of the attorneys that had spoken with Actum, all of the employees of Actum, Actum's legal representation. She wanted everybody that was involved, and then also anybody involved going back to 2016. But this was, I think, like, okay, I've had to go back and forth and deal with these, issues. Y'all are adults, y'all are professionals. You should know better than this. So then she wants all of it. So she gave a very clear list of all contracts, verbal or written, with PR firms, Actum, everybody, and what they were supposed to do and who they were reporting to, anybody who was speaking to anybody. So she wanted this, and this was on Tuesday. She ordered it to be filed by the defendants by 5 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. And this, I'll let you describe.
Yeah, we can run through this. I mean, there's some interesting stuff. I'm able to kind of, I've been kind of living this case for 2 years, just sort of reading the filings of the different parties. And that's what, to me, it's a journalist's job when you cover lawsuits to understand, like, how attorneys speak and don't speak, and, especially, I always find it, I personally like to wait until I see something that's filed in court, as opposed to like, oh, this attorney is mad at, the other attorney. Let's put that like out in the public. Like, I want to see it filed in court, because once it's filed in court, they're telling you, okay, they stand by this. This is, probably as close to factually accurate as you can get whenever that happens, regardless of what side they are on or whether you agree. I think, and definitely in the case of VNA, I find that with their attorneys. But you can learn how, you start to learn their personalities and how they talk about things and how they argue things. And so there's a lot about this that's pretty informative, although it may not seem like it to the average person. And definitely, there's a clear message through this filing that the attorneys did not know about any of this. But there's also very clear that there were a lot of discussions happening over the last few months between the attorneys and Actum. So I think there's going to be some further questions from Judge Levy about that. We see, I think the couple interesting things are these contracts that are defined, because prior to this, the most recent contract that had been filed in court was the November 2019, December 2019 contracts. We really didn't know what the contracts were after that. So this is saying with Actum was formed in late 2021 by people who founded the company Mercury Public Affairs. They left Mercury, which was previously, Veolia's PR firm. Now it's Actum. So now we know, okay, they have a contract that was effective on 2022 for the Suez rebranding project, which Veolia and Suez were merging at the time. That's sort of interesting to me. I'm interested to see more about that, because my understanding from the discovery was that there was a separation between the Suez rebranding and the Flint trial litigation PR. And so I'm not totally sure like how that all lines up. I mean, it's a huge company, so they have a lot going on. So they've clearly employed this company for things other than the Flint water crisis, which is clear. And then June 1st, 2022. So June is when Veolia's defense in land, when their defense argument started, because the plaintiffs obviously gave their case first. And then June is when Veolia's case started. And so I guess that's when their statement of work started there. And then what we see is the next contract we have after that, at least with respect to Veolia North America, is January 1st, 2024. So that's this year. And it's a quote unquote community engagement contract. So I'm not sure what that's going to be. I think I'll be interested. I thought she did ask them to file the community engagement project. I thought she did ask them to file the contracts, but I'm not sure what happened with that. And maybe I misinterpreted that. But I will be interested to see what that contract says, what community engagement / workforce development. It doesn't say here whether it's Flint specific or whether it involved multiple cities, or just overall Veolia. I'm not so sure. Definitely interesting. Then it tells us something else further interesting, that while there are no written agreements with Actum and Veolia or the other firms, there is an oral agreement from late 2021 with the Veolia parent entity in France, which had sort of come out in the depositions that, Veolia France was sort of the ones that kind of took the reign on a lot of this campaign. But we weren't really sure about how, I had never been able to really make sense of how the division of labor occurred. And definitely there's an attempt to, the attorneys are telling us that they, neither firm thereafter directed any of the work that Actum engaged in on behalf of VE and its subsidiaries. We know that we know from depositions with the digital director that it was Veolia France who had the keys to the website by the time the trial started. A French firm was the one that sort of oversaw the design of that. So they're telling us that, the attorneys were not involved in any of that, so that's pretty clear coming through on this. And then, so they did give us the name of the employees who have apparently contacted people in relation to Corey Stern within the last year. So that tells us that this effort has been going on for over the last year. So we will hear maybe more about what exactly they mean contacting persons regarding Corey Stern. One of the lawyers brought up in the hearing yesterday that there was maybe a firm that had been contacting people in Corey's orbit asking about him, and so that appeared to be a separate firm. I didn't quite follow. It's hard to keep track of all of them, but so I don't know if they're connected. And then they gave us a list of the employees that were involved in coming up with a list of who to contact in Flint. So these are the only one I've ever heard of previous to this was Michael McKeon. He's been deposed in the case as being kind of in charge, sort of like the boss of the public affairs operation with this litigation campaign. I had not heard of the other two. And she did also ask, in addition to them listing every single person they'd contacted, she asked for an explanation for why they chose to contact them, which they didn't provide. You will notice these are all activists. They're all people who have spoken out previously about the water crisis. And in many cases actually spoke out against some of the attorney fee issues. And they actually are already featured, and this just as much as anyone, that there's a page on the website that, quotes activist opinions about the state settlement on Veolia Flint Facts. And these people are all on that, or their mom, there's a minor on here and her mother is quoted in that. So I'm not sure if that's where the list comes from, but she did ask for an explanation for, how they were informed or how they made this decision, and that was not provided. But we do get to see that in each case, they, reached out to a resident, and just like there was some court filings from a declaration from Mark Woodson and Pastor Thompson, we'd already seen those declarations, that what they were trying to do, that they were, letting them know that these comments from Corey Stern were going to be featured in a New York Post article and featured on a podcast by Roland Martin, and that, they were seeking residents to comment for these media outlets. Notably, they do not say here where that story originated from. That's clearly going to be the debate of how did this story suddenly come to be, which is not mentioned here. Neither are the communications with Actum and the media outlets. So we see these, which we know that they'd reach out to people over that. And then we're now being informed that Actum's external counsel, Eisner, who has appeared in the case because Actum had to do some depositions last year, but it was different lawyers, not this one specifically. So apparently she did, advise that they did go to her for legal advice. They didn't go to any of the other attorneys, but they did go to their own attorney. Although, within the contracts between Veolia and the PR firms, there are agreements about certain legal representation, which I think the judge will probably have to consider as she's going through this, is like, what liability has each party taken, has each entity taken on for each other? Let's see. Oh, yes. And so they're saying that none of the lawyers at any of the firms or VNA or Veolia had any communication with Actum regarding the matters that gave rise to the February 13th, 2024 hearing. They don't say whether Veolia staff, communication staff, or executive staff had any role in this. So that is missing. We don't have any indication on that. They're only saying that for here, they're really referring to just the attorneys, which to me is this whole filing is which is the strongest, they are the most, they have the most responsibility to not violate certain rules. So that's what they're going for here. Yeah. And then we have, this to me is really interesting because they go through, the different phone calls that Actum was having with Kelly Kramer, who is one of the defense attorneys, and who has kind of been overseeing sort of their defense of the public relations aspect, and a lot of the documents and that sort of thing. So I guess here he's having conversations pretty regularly over the last month and a half. And that, that makes sense. They were leading up to a trial. So I assume, and I guess this community engagement project, so there's something going on there. There's a lot happening. It was a busy month. And then preparing for this. And then I guess we don't know when they came to an agreement on the settlement, but they obviously would have been having to talk about that too. Which you see, to February 1st, 2024. And Mr. Olson had said this during court, that there had been some communications between them to prepare for the settlement, because you want to prepare your talking points and how you're going to do that. And then you get to after that. So February 2nd, 2024, which is the day after that settlement was announced. There are, they're talking about the coverage of the settlement. And then on February 6th, 2024, which is the same day that Flint residents were contacted by Actum, there were teleconference and texts with the mayor and attorney and Actum regarding the status of the litigation. But it says that were prior to, because on Tuesday, according to the court filing, Corey Stern sent a letter in on Tuesday evening saying he had been advised that residents had been contacted, potentially represented residents. And so that kind of alerted both the judge and the defense attorneys that, hey, this is happening, what have you. So this is pointing out that this teleconference and these texts all occurred before Mr. Stern sent his letter. And it's unrelated to those issues. So we don't know what that's about, but it does show they're in pretty regular contact. And then we get to the truck, which, the attorneys, they said, I think they said in the court on Tuesday that they didn't know about it, or at least they definitely didn't appear to know about it. And they're now confirming that, none of the lawyers, whether it's the outside firms or the in-house counsel, had any knowledge of that truck. And this is the only time, they say no employees for Veolia and VNA had any knowledge regarding the truck. So we do now have, I think they were supposed to provide in general Veolia employees knowledge of all of this. They didn't, except for right here. But it does tell us that sort of two of Actum's, top executives were aware or were involved in the arrangement of the truck. They don't mention the website though, so I'm not sure, obviously they're connected, but they don't mention who was involved in the website, if that was something new or what have you. So there's definitely a lot still out there that we don't know. And I imagine we will see a filing from Judge Levy in the next couple of days, letting us know what's next and what's going to happen next.
And that's the thing. And so this, if you followed through with us this over this hour and some, that this is a lot. Right. And this, of course, going along with the entire Flint water crisis and our search for justice. So civil cases, the criminal cases, there are so much. It has been so overcomplicated, and it's basically all of these responsible parties who acted or didn't act, and they are putting so much work and money into covering up themselves and this, and very little focus going on to how can we fix what's happened to these people, even though there's multiple statements put out by Veolia saying we feel that Flint residents deserve justice. Well, okay, this is not justice. This mess, distracting the public, distracting the courts, holding things up for this kind of immature back and forth and favor, the behaviors, the truck, the everything. As a Flint resident, it is disgusting to me because this should be about us, what we need to recover, our healing, the things that we have gone through so nobody else has to go through it again. But now we're having to spend time, which I always appreciate talking to you. As you know, we can talk for hours, but you're fascinating and you follow all this because imagine, and people fall asleep when I talk about water testing and science and the pipes and all that stuff. Yeah. Imagine if one person had to handle the science, the criminal cases, the litigation. No, it's been these people everybody's got this expertise. Because how are we as Flint residents, while we're trying to survive right now, while we're trying to, you know, keep ourselves and our families healthy, while we're trying to rebuild our lives, supposed to follow all this?
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it, is diverting our attention, getting us to focus on the wrong things. You know, we had that with, you know, all of a sudden there was these hit pieces on us as individual activists, and all of a sudden you've got activists at each other's throats when we're all should be on the same page. And then there was this and pointing fingers and all this stuff. And, you know, when you're in a crisis and you got a bunch of traumatized people fighting, okay, that makes sense. But when you have like a multi-billion-dollar corporation going after a single attorney out of, what is it, a couple hundred attorneys overall, with all of this, going after a single one, and then trying to get Flint residents to turn on this one attorney that, like, he's not even my attorney. Like, why, you know, and Nayyirah Sharif was like, I don't even know this person. Like, why is this happening? Why is this the focus? Why is this what's in the media? Why is this what's the filings and their website? Why is this being posted up? Like, why, if you search Flint, and if people want to look up the Flint and Veolia settlement to see what's going on, especially if you're a Flint resident, why do we got to see this stuff? And again, Corey Stern and his comments from 2018, he, you know, has to handle his PR stuff and apologies and all this great stuff, which he brought up in court and everything. But that's him and his personal stuff. It has nothing to do with us. And again, if somebody says something off base, racist, rude, whatever, hey, you got some apologizing to, you deal with that. But why is it Veolia, who we're fighting against to get some justice, why is it their job to bring this up and be like, hey, but look at him? No, I'm looking at you.
Right.
I'm looking at you and what you did, and who did this truck, who did this website. Also finding out Flint residents never gave their permission for their words or their faces to be used on Veolia's website. Because I had somebody approach me saying, hey, did you give them permission to use your face or your words? I'm like, absolutely not. You know, especially to defend themselves or for Veolia to attack the state of Michigan. No, you worry about you and fix what you did. But also, we're going through enough. And if you cared about Flint and getting justice and all this stuff, this is not the way. This is not the way. And apparently, like, maybe you should get a better PR firm or whatever. But in no way do I personally believe that Veolia had no communication whatsoever with their PR firm, because why would you hire them then? And also, it blows my mind that there's this giant contract and this giant company and all this litigation, and there's a verbal contract. So that way we can't see in writing who's to say what. And again, maybe this is because, you know, I went to grad school and stuff and for business, and that's not what you do, especially if you're a responsible corporation and a giant international corporation that's going through a lot of litigation. You would want everything in print. So why this is important is because this has become so convoluted and so messy. And the folks over in East Palestine, Ohio, are dealing with it with Norfolk Southern. When you bring in, you know, government trying to do the CYA, and then you've got these corporations trying to do the same thing and pointing fingers and clutching pearls, making it a political issue instead of a human issue, making it about the lawyer fees versus what we need, making it, you know, over just pointing all the fingers. It causes so much harm. And, you know, and people are like, oh, Veolia should be ashamed. Well, if there was a soul or conscience or care and consideration, sure. But that's not what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is a ton of money that could go to the settlement, could go to helping Flint residents. It's going towards media campaigns to go after an attorney that doesn't even represent all of us and isn't the only attorney by far. And we don't care, I guess. Like, as a Flint resident, we don't care. Like, and it was funny because at the hearing, Corey Stern had said, well, I guess I could thank you, Veolia and Actum or whoever did this, for getting this group of Flint residents that haven't been in the same room since probably 2016 to stand together. And we weren't there to protest Corey Stern. That his comments, that's a whole different situation, a whole different, you know, separate thing that he could deal with folks. But we have more important things like trying to survive, because our pipes aren't replaced. Our bodies aren't fixed. We still don't have health coverage, mental health care. We don't have enough of that. There was another 13-year-old boy and we can't drink our water safely. We can't bathe without things happening. The smell, everything is still rupturing. We are still in survival mode almost 10 years into this. And so Veolia, take a hint, or maybe with your community engagement, maybe engage with the community and not try to manipulate our emotions and our anger, because we're not suing Corey Stern. And actually residents chose him as their representation. So back off, just seriously do what's right. But also, hopefully this will maybe set some precedents with the court on these are things you cannot do. So, I mean, you'd said in your reporting of all the years of your reporting and all these different trials, you've never seen anything like this. So what would you like to see come out of this? Because I always hope that whatever bad stuff happens to us, maybe it'll set a precedent so it doesn't happen to other people. What do you, as a journalist, what would you like to see changed out of this?
So, I mean, a couple things, I guess, in terms of one, to me, I see Flint residents as having one of like maybe the strongest ability to advocate for yourselves that I've ever seen in any community. You've done it. You did it in January. You did it in 2014 and 2015, and now you're doing it now. And I hope, in some ways, you're the only community that I think could have things happen to you by expensive public relations firms and actually push back in a way. And so I hope that just in general, maybe you guys, unfortunately, I guess you guys just have to set the precedent. So hopefully it maybe changes how companies interact with communities that are suing them or that in the future. I also really hope, I personally as a journalist, I'm really disappointed in the media coverage. And it's not just with this instance, it's with other aspects of the Flint water crisis, where sort of whatever the defense attorneys seem to kind of put out in public relations is always the narrative. And, the media really latched onto this narrative about attorney fees and Flint residents wanting more money. I've never heard a Flint resident say, I'm like expecting $1 million check, not that you don't deserve it. But I think it really, to me, has like misconstrued like what you guys are fighting for and what you are, as if you are like, I think that is always a thing people like to do, is make someone look greedy, like you're holding a hand, you have like your hand out for a check or something, when really you just want justice and you want what you deserve. And I think that I don't like that. I don't like the media has done that. I don't like this idea that the media is just not following the court case, and that now, because like I'm going to tell you guys that I think, my recommendation would be two things. One, hopefully as residents, I would recommend starting to following the court docket. The court filings do go up. We can put a link up on the Court Listener, which is a free website so that you can see most of the documents. And I think at this point, like, sadly, you have to maybe expect that reporters are not going to do a much better job of covering this. And so you're going to have to read the case on your own. I try to do what I can. You can always call me and ask me, to tell you what was filed latest, when the next hearing is, and I will give you, I'll give you the information. I'm an investigative reporter, not a news reporter, but I will try to, at least since the news reporters aren't doing their job, I will try to give you as much information as I can always. And then I think, I hope the journalists can do a better job of explaining when they are doing a story, where that story came from. I think it is our obligation to do that as reporters, to explain how we came to a story, where did we find it, what inspired us to do this story, and if it was a PR firm, who is that PR firm? And I think to not communicate that to people, to me, is like sort of, it's just a violation of a lot of journalistic, like, integrity and tenets and whatever. Assuming, though, that it's not going to change, because my experience in Michigan media is that that's just how they work, is that I would recommend that residents, when you get reached out to, especially if it is something where it feels like it's a controversial topic and there's sort of some anger that they're trying to get out of you. So-and-so said this, or how do you feel about this? Just ask, who is this person that's calling you? Who are they associated with? Are any of their clients involved in any aspect of the Flint water crisis? Because it's maybe not just going to be a defendant. Maybe it's the plaintiff's attorneys. You should be asking, who are they? What are their interests? What is the focus of this story? How did they come to this story? And I think, unfortunately, I really hope that it doesn't result in you guys speaking out less, especially as we come to the 10th anniversary. But I guess I can only recommend that you do start to ask questions a little bit about like what this person's motive is and who they came to this, how they came to this story, where it comes from, and really consider if they're maybe trying to use your anger. It's really unfair. You should be able to be pissed off at any attorney, and you should be able to speak about it. And the attorneys can take it. If you want to speak out about them, they can take that. But we're in a situation where people are trying to manipulate your anger, and that really sucks. And I think that going forward, it just has to be part of the conversation. And I'm like so sorry that this happened. And I hope that somehow, somewhere, some journalist will listen to me someday and we'll start to see maybe those wrongs. But I don't have a ton of faith in it for the moment.
And you're right, because it's okay and it's our right to ask who is calling, who you're representing. And also, if somebody wants to do an interview, especially if they want to do a live interview, that, you know, because that's where they can clip stuff up. You can absolutely say, what's the topic? I need to know, is there other guests? What's the theme here? And if they change it on you live, you can absolutely, because that's me. I've had that happen to where they've changed on me. I just continue to talk about what we had talked about. It is okay to continue to say, no, thank you. That's not what I'm here to talk about. And make it clear that they're trying to do the whole trick thing, because you can do that, especially live. You have every right, because this is about you as the person being interviewed and everything. But also, and Nayyirah Sharif did this. If your quote is being misrepresented, or you were not given the links, or you were not given the information, it is your right to demand, like Nayyirah actually did, that the story, before it's even being published, be read to you, and your quote be read to you, and for you to say, that is not what I said, and to demand changes. But you can do that. It is your right to not be misrepresented in the media. And we have to do that, because again, at the beginning, the media made it look like we're just a bunch of poor people, you know, especially poor Black and brown folk that want something for free. And we're poor people, and we should have paid our water bills, which of course we did, or we wouldn't have had water on. So always making it look like, oh, the Flint residents just want something for free. And like Rhonda had put in the chat, they're waiting for us to die so they don't have to pay us. And she's only asking for enough money to replace the pipes in her basement that she did not break, that she did not corrode. And that's the thing. They're doing this to, you know, to continue to pull away the narrative and the truth that we are the victims here. We didn't do this to ourselves. And that these companies are somehow the victims, or somebody else is the bad guy here, or somebody else is this responsible. It's the finger pointing that children do. So if we need to speak up louder. Because again, and I said this, you know, in court, I said, this to me feels like, I mean, the truck, the speaker, all these statements and the misdirection and the blindsiding of Flint residents, to me, it feels like, you know, Veolia, and yet here's another wealthy corporation, you know, dodging responsibility, but also trying to silence Flint residents' voices. And that goes back to emergency management. And this is what Nayyirah had talked about, is that silencing our voices goes back to emergency management, which is the root cause, besides greed and privatization, of the Flint water crisis. So again, we cannot let that stand. We have to stand up and say our voices matter, and our truth matters. And that's why we're going to do these. And so I want to thank you, Kayla. I want to thank everybody who stayed with us. And I want to thank everybody who has stood by us, everybody who speaks out, everybody continues to speak out. Rhonda, continue to do, residents, continue to tell the truth, continue to tell your truth and your demands, and stop letting, you know, these corporations try to be like, oh, well, we're going to upset you about this. And it's like, you know, like, hey, my leg is broken. And they're like, well, let me shoot you in the arm and you won't worry about that leg anymore. No, my leg is still broken. And, you know, stop trying to misdirect. And so, to Veolia, that me personally, hey, seriously, stop it. Stop it. You know, just do what you're supposed to do. What's right. Haha. I know that's funny. And Vicky, you're very welcome. Thank you guys. I appreciate it, because this is important. It's so important to me. I know it's Kayla's whole life basically is about this, you know, but
at this point,
especially as complicated and convoluted as this is, trying to track the movements of these PR firms and this multi-billion-dollar corporation. And we're just regular folks, you know? And so we appreciate you helping to inform us and be like, hey, did you know this happened? And no, you know, a lot of times I'll tell you, no, oh dear God, what happened? But you'll give the links so we can read it and so we can share this. So thank you for going through this with us, you know, well, for the past several years, but also today. And we're probably going to have you back to go through this, because this matters. And we also appreciate you so much for sitting down with us and helping to explain it to where we can understand it. So everybody, this is important. And
I appreciate you guys.
Yes. And we just want to make sure that everybody knows what's going on, and if you get contacted, and also what Veolia is pulling. And if there's more hearings we can show up to, and they want to put some ugly trucks out there, then let's just continue to do that, because at least our actions are having some kind of, you know, reaction. And at least maybe we can redirect their attention for a moment to put some more ugly trucks up. But that being said, I want to thank everybody for being here. Please share this out. If you have questions, please let us know. We're here and we're going to continue to do this. But as for in Flint, I'm Melissa Mays, and you all are amazing. I appreciate you all. And Kayla, again, I cannot thank you enough. And yeah, so everybody have a wonderful weekend, and yeah, just keep speaking out and keep being an amazing person and people that you are. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.